Hello there, my RPG lovers, and welcome to another video. During the early and mid 2000s, it was very common to see games based off movies with the same title. They would usually release very close to the movie itself, probably to try and hype it up as much as possible.
Wow, actions speak louder than words, hero.
And while you can certainly find some decent or even amazing movie-based games from back in the day, the majority of these games were either painfully mediocre or straight up terrible. It seems like studios would get very limited amount of time and budget to develop these games, so it's a miracle they even work properly. Then again, that's not an excuse for how terrible some of these games are, and nobody is surprised that 90% of them fell into obscurity.
What the hell is even that?
We're going to take a look at 5 specific movie-based games in this video, which are mostly forgotten nowadays. So sit back, grab some drinks, and let me tell you about my journey with some pretty obscure movie-based games.
A torturous work is never done.
Number 5. Blade 2. Blade 2 came out in 2002 on original Xbox and PlayStation 2. There was also a Blade 1 game, which came out on PlayStation 1, and I might cover that one in some future videos, if you guys like this one. Anyway, I played the PlayStation 2 version through emulation, and I didn't have any notable technical issues. You can run most of these PlayStation 2 games in very high resolution and high FPS, as you probably already know if you're into emulation. Putting that aside, I personally love Blade movies, especially the second one, so I was really curious about the game, but I didn't get my hopes up. I was mostly interested to see how and if they're going to pay homage to the second movie, but my expectations for the gameplay was pretty low.
Excellent work, Blade. It seems that you're in good shape after all.
Even though this game is called Blade 2, it's not exactly based on the second movie. In fact, it's actually a sequel which takes place between the events of Blade 2 and Blade Trinity. This game left some very bad first impressions because the fundamental gameplay mechanics felt very clunky. Moving Blade around is done by using the left thumbstick, but this also turns your camera. There is no other way to control your camera, but come to think of it, most early PlayStation 2 action adventures would not even allow you to control the camera at all. They would have fixed angles or very limited camera movement in general. And even though there are a lot of things I hate about fixed camera angles, which you're going to see in some other games we cover here, I would still prefer that over Blade's 2 camera controls. Moving Blade around feels like you're driving a car, which is not a thing you want to hear when you're playing as an agile, very strong vampire hunter. I still can't get over how cool Wesley Snipes was in this role, and I don't think anyone can replace him as Blade.
You gotta be kidding me.
Sadly, he wasn't the one who voiced Blade in this game, by the way, and that was probably a wise choice.
Keep your friends close. Keep your enemies closer.
Speaking of voice actors, Whistler is voiced by Don Del Ciapo, a guy who should sound very familiar to people who are regular watchers of my videos.
Now that the gate is open, head up the steps and follow the walkway around. His last order was, "Come." And they came, all of them, even the dragons.
Like I said, Blade 2 leaves some very bad first impressions because of the controls, and camera is not the only reason. The right thumbstick is used for melee combos and swords. The game really tries to convince you that having a good rhythm is the key for performing useful melee combos, and there is some truth to this. If you successfully perform these combos by hitting the thumbstick at the right time, Blade will even hit multiple vampires at once and kill them in a few hits. However, using the right thumbstick for these actions is flawed by default, and it feels like a chore. Combined with very stiff animations and bad controls in general, the melee combat leaves a lot to be desired, to say the least. The only thing which makes this a bit more bearable is some iconic one-liners that you're going to hear from Blade every once in a while.
Ooh, so exciting.
So exciting.
Come to think of it, Blade just sounds very cringy when his lines are not being read by Wesley Snipes.
Keep your friends close. Keep your enemies closer.
Speaking of cringe, Blade does that iconic fist pump from the first movie every time you finish a mission. Before you start a mission, you get to select your weapons. You start off with only your gun, some ammo and the glaive, but as you do more missions, you unlock a couple of more weapons. The gun will kill vampires very fast, but the ammo will be very limited in every mission. You can find ammo on certain places on the map, and some vampires will drop it as well. Using the gun feels serviceable, but it's only a little bit better than melee combat system. The only reason it feels a bit better is because you kill vampires easier and not because of some great third-person shooter mechanics. You can use the target lock, which allows you to kill vampires from insane range, or you can fire as you move, which works okay, but don't forget about those awful camera controls. When I first unlocked the shotgun, I thought it was just a slower, useless gun. However, the game starts throwing a bunch of vampires at you at once, so being able to blast 4 or 5 of them at once feels pretty good. What doesn't feel so good, apart from all the things I mentioned so far, is the level design. The mission objectives are usually very simple, but the way the levels are designed can be very annoying. There is a lot of backtracking on almost all levels, and the game will use every chance it gets to respawn more enemies. There were moments when I got really pissed off because of the level design and all the backtracking you need to do. It's just not that fun. Blade 2 can get pretty challenging, but not in a way you might expect. It's mostly because healing in this game is very limited and you're left to the mercy of RNG. Just like the ammo, you can find health packs on specific places on the level, but you'll usually need at least a bit more to survive the whole level. Blade has a special bar which needs to be filled if you want to use his swords. He also becomes much faster when the bar is full, and the attacks with the sword are OP. You're going to cut down everyone in just a hit or two. It seems like vampires just give up when you pull out your sword. It's kinda funny. Yeah, the AI is very dumb in this game, but smart enough to kill you if you relax too much. The controls for using the sword are the same. You need to use the right thumbstick in 4 different directions. There are some slightly cool finishers that Blade can do with or without the sword, usually on the last enemy you fight. But those animations are even more stiff than regular animations, somehow. Speaking of stiff animations, you have a jump button, and it seems like they tried their best to mimic how Blade jump in the movies. Not only that, but the side jump looks pretty cool, even though it feels terrible to use and you're probably not even going to use it. Putting all of that aside, the game pays homage to the movies in a couple of more ways. I'm pretty sure they tried to recreate the bloodbath scene from the first movie, which is like one of the best superhero introductions ever. But it's nowhere near as cool as in the movie, and it's only a bit similar because of the music and the rave. Vampires have a similar visual effect upon dying like in the movies, which is a cool touch. I have to admit that this game started to grow on me the more I played, despite all of its issues. I still wouldn't recommend trying it out unless you're a huge Blade fan like me.
Some motherfuckers are always trying to ice skate uphill.
Number 4. The Chronicles of Narnia, Prince Caspian. The Chronicles of Narnia Prince Caspian came out in 2008 for PC and consoles. I played the PlayStation 3 version of the game, which works flawlessly through emulation, and you get to run it in 60 FPS. As you can probably tell, this game still looks pretty damn good. It's obvious that it had a very decent budget, because visually it still holds up today for the most part. The movie with the same name is the second Narnia movie, and there are 3 in total, I believe. I think I watched the first movie back in the day, and to be honest, I always thought that the movie was pretty lame and weird. I might piss off some Narnia fans out there, but oh well. Suck it up, bitch.
You gotta be kidding me.
But I was very curious about this game because when I saw the gameplay on YouTube from some clips, I thought it looks pretty damn good. It gave me Lord of the Rings The Return of the King vibes, especially some scenes where there are a ton of enemies at once on the screen. This is why I got disappointed the more I played the game, because I quickly realized that couldn't be farther from the truth. Prince Caspian is one of those games that look very cool every time you see the gameplay, but once you start playing it, you immediately notice a lot of problems. First of all, let's mention the story at least. The story of Prince Caspian has a very simple premise. Only 1 year has passed in the real world since the first adventure ended, but in Narnia almost 1300 years have passed. The evil King Miraz prevents the rightful heir, his young nephew Prince Caspian, from ruling the land of Narnia. So naturally, Caspian summons a bunch of 12-year-old kids and some furries to help him reclaim the throne. There are 6 different levels, and the way this menu is presented is another reason why I got some Return of the King vibes. That game had a very similar presentation when it comes to the selecting level menu. Speaking of which, Prince Caspian also features some real scenes from the movies, so I'm not crazy to compare it to Lord of the Rings games that were obviously inspired by them, in some way at least. There are 20 playable characters in this game, which sounds very impressive, and to give this game some credit, it is impressive at the most baseline level, I guess. All of these characters have unique weapons and some abilities that you need to use to progress through different levels. Not all levels will feature those 20 different characters though, and you're going to play with the same 4 characters for the most time. The combat system leaves some good first impressions, but it quickly falls apart when you learn how it actually works. I played with the Minotaur dude in the first missions a lot, and his attacks are pretty cool. This battle scene is very impressive because it features a lot of characters on screen at once, and there are satisfying ragdolls. However, the game forces you to switch characters quite a bit because of those unique abilities I mentioned. And this is yet another game in this video which doesn't show you the health of enemies, which means that the game calculates damage dealt in a weird way. Your characters have a health bar though, and it's easy to see when you take damage. The lack of enemy health bars wouldn't be an issue if the combat didn't have other problems as well. First of all, it might seem like there is a lot of fighting in this game, and it would be logical to expect that considering how the game begins. That's not the case though, because Prince Caspian is very heavy on the puzzles. As a matter of fact, this game is riddled with terrible puzzles, which are just mind-numbingly boring and they fail to make a lot of sense. They have that bullshit video game logic which can be very frustrating. For example, take a look at this gap between the land and the river. You would assume that everyone can easily jump on the other side, right? Well no, you have to carry 2 stones and carefully place them so you can step on them and cross the river like a little bitch you are. I can't even describe how fucking stupid this is, but then again, I remember that these movies were aimed at kids, I guess. Although I checked the rating for the game and it says PEGI 12, so I don't know. Even so, I bet there were 12-year-old kids who also thought that moving these rocks around was dumb as hell. Anyway, other puzzles usually require you to utilize the abilities from different characters, like the grappling hook from the dwarf. You can also crawl into tight spaces with him as well, use a character that has range abilities to trigger something, and so on. You also have to interact with the environment quite a bit, find specific items needed to complete the puzzle, and move forwards. Even a lot of so-called combat encounters have very gimmicky mechanics which are just boring. Like having to mount a giant who can do something that only giant can do. Smashing things with him is the closest feeling of fun you can experience in the game, unless you need to do something like getting his dumb giant friend from a huge hole. Yeah, that happens as well. Some levels require you to use throwing objects before you can do actual damage to enemies. Like I said, a lot of gimmicky mechanics. Now, all of this looks pretty cool, and that's why I think the game had so much potential. It already had great visuals, good animations, and great presentation in general, but the actual gameplay mechanics suck, especially in combat. The whole combat system falls apart when the game wants you to fight some elite NPCs, or dare I say, bosses. The combat feels the worst when you face such enemies, for more than a couple of reasons. One of the reasons is the lack of a proper hit feedback, and you can basically just spam attacks until they all fall down. You will get hit sometimes, but it's not a big deal. I had some praise for animations, but they can also stop working all of a sudden sometimes. It really seems like these developers had no idea what to do with combat mechanics, especially in those situations. It's like you just stacked a bunch of cool animations together with no rhyme or reason. The game is very easy in general, and the only slightly challenging parts are where you have to do a specific action in a limited amount of time. It's a shame because it has so much potential. I don't recommend trying this game out unless you're a huge fan of Narnia movies.
Do you think it's a bear? It's alright, Susan. I haven't gone wild just yet.
Number 3. Ghost Rider. Ghost Rider came out in 2007 on PlayStation 2, PSP and Game Boy Advance. Once again, I used PlayStation 2 emulator to play this game and it looks and runs very good. More importantly, the gameplay is very good. Ghost Rider is a hack and slash game which takes place after the events of the first movie. This game got some pretty bad reviews from game websites like IGN and GameSpot, but the user score on Metacritic is pretty damn good. While this game definitely has some very annoying issues like the repetitive gameplay and lack of enemy variety, I think Ghost Rider is a pretty good game in general. I watched Ghost Rider movies long time ago, so I don't remember much about the story, but I do remember some epic scenes, like this one for example. Ghost Rider game introduces some villains from the first movie and the comic, which is pretty cool. The story is presented with great slideshows, which are only slightly animated. Although to be honest, I didn't care that much about the story in this game. I did love how these little story segments were presented though.
Roxanne, she dies tonight. Ghost Rider.
The combat is heavily revolved around performing combos. You start off with some simple combos and you can unlock more powerful combinations and attacks from points you get from killing enemies. The controls in Ghost Rider are pretty snappy, which makes performing combos very satisfying. There are jumping attacks, the block button, and more than a couple of very satisfying combinations which allow you to dominate all enemies on the screen. Until you run into some big enemies, which are immune to being stun locked like smaller enemies. Your dodge is very important as well, but I found the dash ability to be equally important, especially because you can chain this move together with more combos. Your shotgun need at least one red bar to use, and this will be one of your crucial moves in combat, especially when you're trying to get the vengeance bar up or just finish those pesky ranged enemies. No, but seriously, I hate being in the middle of a great combo only for these little fuckers to interrupt it with ranged attacks.
The innocents will be avenged! Away!
In the second part of the game, you'll get to fight some more enemies with ranged attacks and you really need to learn how to block them. Luckily, you have some great sound cues for these attacks, so you only need to listen carefully. When this green bar fills up, you'll be able to use a very strong ability which wipes out all smaller enemies on the screen and increases your speed and strength. Vengeance bar will fill up as long as you don't get hit a lot, and the game encourages you to perform diverse combos. The more diverse combos you perform, the faster this bar fills up, and that's fine, but there is a very annoying mechanic related to this. You are basically forced to do this every once in a while, because the game will spawn enemies that are immune to all damage. The only way to deal damage and kill them is to bring your vengeance level up, which can be very freaking frustrating. You'll stand there like a moron and just kick the shit out of these regular ass NPCs that you usually kill in a couple of hits, until you get the bar up. It's such a forced mechanic that serves no purpose, because these enemies are essentially the same like all others. Unlike some other games in this video, Ghost Rider doesn't have the problem with combat on the fundamental level. Like I said, the combat is satisfying and the controls are snappy. But it has some pretty big issues with the balancing and the lack of enemy variety, especially in the first part of the game. I played on punishing difficulty, which is supposed to be hard. And tell you what, it has a perfect name because it really makes the game feel punishing. I think there is a big difference between punishing game mechanics and hard game mechanics. I like hard games, but I hate punishing game mechanics, if that makes sense. Ghost Rider's hard difficulty is more punishing than hard, meaning that it has some very annoying features. For example, the healing is very limited, and you're rarely going to be able to get any health back before you finish the entire level. You gotta love how they introduce these little fire braziers which can heal you a little bit, and they proceed to not include them almost at all. They are few and far between. The game will spawn waves and waves of enemies, mostly of the same type for about half of the game, which becomes annoying very fast. Then you just move to the next level and repeat the whole process. In between some levels you'll have these segments where you get to ride your motorcycle because you're the freaking Ghost Rider, duh. And you will fight a couple of bosses on foot and in motorcycle segments. I'm not counting the elite enemies as bosses because the game starts using them straight away as regular enemies. And that will pretty much describe the whole game design of Ghost Rider. Tell you what, I love the motorcycle segments, they're easily the best part about the whole game. These levels are usually very short and enjoyable, and there is some challenge to it. You need to make some semi-precise jumps, slides, and kill enemies by shooting them or use the chain if they get too close. Some level up abilities are related to these motorcycle segments, but those points are better spent on regular combos. I was very disappointed with the level design, or the lack of it. It's one of the most basic and boring level designs in a game that I recently experienced. It's pretty damn bad. I mean, it's serviceable for a hack and slash game, but there is not much to say about it. You just move to another area where you defeat waves of enemies. Speaking of which, I was ready to give up on the game because it felt extremely repetitive even after only a couple of hours. But Ghost Rider started introducing some brand new enemy types in the second half of the game, and I liked the boss fights quite a bit. I was kinda hating myself for playing the game on the hardest difficulty because it only made my experience worse. Everything would be much better if you can heal after you clear the level, but you usually can't. And even when you can, you won't get your full health back. Let's not forget the camera in this game, which can be downright horrible at times. You can sometimes recenter the camera by pressing the left thumbstick, but only when the game feels like it. There were countless moments where I was facing enemies in awkward angles, which can just get you killed easily. What really took me by surprise is the segment where you get to see Blade from, well, Blade. And not only see him, when you finish the game, you can replay it as Blade. Imagine me playing the Blade game I covered before, and then coming straight to Ghost Rider and getting to play as Blade again. That's kinda wild, especially because this game feels way better to play than Blade, so there you go. Overall, I like this game quite a bit, despite some pretty annoying problems it has. If you're not bothered by the bad things I mentioned, I even recommend checking it out. Number 2. Van Helsing. Van Helsing came out in 2004 on PlayStation 2, Xbox and Game Boy Advance. As you could probably guess by now, I also played this game with PlayStation 2 emulator. It works great and it also looks great for a 2004 PlayStation 2 game. I was actually very impressed with the quality of character models, especially for Dracula and his brides.
Trust me. There is nothing ladylike about him. Welcome to Assyria. So nice to see you again. Did I scare you?
The environments look okay, and I think the castle looks pretty cool in general. But listen, you're not going to play this game because of graphics, okay? First of all, I didn't expect this game to be nearly as good as it was. And when you start playing the game with low expectations, even a mediocre game can be very impressive. That's not to say that Van Helsing is a mediocre game, it's actually pretty good in general.
Pulse 2.
This game is obviously based on the movie, and I love the fact that actors from the movie were hired to voice their characters.
Let her go.
Tell me where the Frankenstein monster hides, and we have a deal. Tell me, or say goodbye to your little princess.
I think that Richard Rosburg had an amazing performance as Dracula, and the game pays homage to some of the classic scenes from the movie.
You don't remember, do you? You don't remember, do you? You don't even remember your name.
This just wouldn't work if they hired someone else to voice these characters. Let's not forget Hugh Jackman, who also did a pretty good job with his role as Van Helsing. Van Helsing is hired by the Holy Order of Vatican to eliminate evil, and the game starts with a battle against Mr. Hyde. Van Helsing lost his memory, and pretty much everyone tells him that they remember him from before, but he has no idea what they're talking about. The majority, if not all cutscenes in the game, have a lot of similarities with actual movie scenes, which I liked quite a bit. All of this translates into gameplay as well. You're going to fight all major characters from the movie, and I was surprised with the amount of mechanics that bosses have in this game. I mean, sure, some of them are really annoying, especially those fucking attacks on the ground you have to avoid that most bosses have. The reason why I found those mechanics annoying is not because they are bad by default. Actually, they are pretty good, especially for such an old game. But the control scheme in Van Helsing is not that great in general, which is why it can feel awkward and kinda stiff when you try to avoid some of these mechanics. It's not impossible, but it's more annoying than it should be. Combined with the annoying camera, the gameplay can be pretty frustrating from time to time. On the other side, I think the gameplay is very fun most of the time. Van Helsing has a very solid range gameplay where you get to use a couple of different weapons and unlock alternative fire modes. You also get some melee weapons as well, which are actually very useful. The whole combat experience is a bit mindless, especially against regular enemies. Although I like how some enemies are immune to certain weapon, so you have to switch between guns, shotgun and a crossbow. You will unlock another ranged weapon a bit later, but it's mostly used for puzzle solving. I use the crossbow a lot because it's effective against the majority of enemies in the game. The alternative mode will fire even stronger hits, but they need to be charged with regular attacks. You also have some items to replenish the special ammo that you can find or buy. There is some light platforming and puzzle solving in the game. Even though I don't think the combat gets repetitive, Van Helsing also has that extremely annoying feature that most older games had. Whenever you move on to another area and come back, the game will respawn all enemies. This is especially annoying on levels where you absolutely need to go back and forth, although you can straight up skip these fights, so it's not a huge deal, I guess. It's not like Ghost Rider, which basically forces you to kill everything on the screen until you're able to move on. The enemy variety is pretty good as well. Like I mentioned before, there is a very solid amount of different boss fights. The game repeats some boss fights a lot, but they also add new mechanics to these bosses, which keeps them fresh. I didn't like all of them, but overall, I was very surprised with the amount of mechanics they have. Fighting Dracula can be frustrating because of the problems I mentioned before, but I still found this fight very impressive. Or how about this fight on the carriage against the brides? If I remember correctly, this is the second time you fight these brides, and I like it quite a bit. You need to avoid attacks by jumping from the carriage on the horse while still doing damage to them. Between every mission you can buy some items like ammo or health packs that you can use later on, but this game doesn't really have any character progression. To be honest, I don't think it even needs it. The gameplay loop is focused around switching weapons around, which works okay. There's really not much to say about the gameplay other than that. It's simple and pretty enjoyable, especially if you like the movie. Overall, Van Helsing is a must-play for every fan of the movie, and I would even recommend it to everyone. It's a great PS2 action-adventure which deserves a remake or a remaster.
Come, my children! Remove this foul excuse of a man from my side!
Number 1. Aeon Flux.
I'm in trouble. Right?
How about here? All units proceed to my location. Suspect spotted.
Aeon Flux is a video game adaptation of the 2005 science fiction movie of the same name, with elements of Aeon Flux animated series. This game came out in 2005 on PlayStation 2 and Xbox. I played it through emulation, and you need to do some tweaks to get it running in 60 FPS. It's just a simple tweak in the emulator, it's not a big deal. Anyway, I never watched the movie or animated series, so this was completely new to me.
All right. Be careful with it. It's precious.
But after playing this game, I'm certainly interested in watching the movie at least, because this game is pretty damn crazy. It's one of the most unique action adventures that I played recently. It's like a mix of Matrix, Prince of Persia, Mission Impossible, and you add a little bit of sci-fi elements on top of it. Yeah, like I said, pretty crazy. This game is developed by Terminal Reality, and I covered one of their games in the past, called Blood Rain 2. Well, I can tell you straight away that I like the gameplay in Aeon Flux a lot more than in Blood Rain 2, but that game also had some great things about it.
Alright, thanks for the lesson, bitch.
Aeon Flux takes place in the far future after a biological disease has wiped out Earth's population except for those living in Bregna. Bregna is a walled, protected city-state and is ruled by the Congress of Scientists who discovered the cure for the disease. Your main goal is to kill one of Bregna's most influential leaders called Trevor Godchild. The game has a very interesting tutorial where you basically act as a runaway model. This is where you start learning all basic mechanics for the game and you pretty much get bombarded with all the info about game mechanics. In between these modeling segments, you're trying to infiltrate the underground lab and find more info about Trevor Godchild. This is truly one of the best tutorials for the game that I played in recent memory because it didn't feel like a tutorial. The story is a bit confusing and you'll have a lot of questions if you don't know anything about Aeon Flux like me. It was still interesting regardless because it felt pretty unique. By the way, the protagonist is called Aeon Flux, if it was not obvious, and she's voiced by the same actress from the movie. I think she was pretty solid in this role, although her performance is a bit flat, and she ends up sounding bored in a lot of scenes.
Suspension fields, complete with suspended victims.
What's he wearing? There, on the back of his head.
I expected you to know. Why don't I bring a few samples?
Yes, please.
I have no idea about the movie and if this is good or not, so I guess Aeon Flux fans will correct me in the comments. Just like they corrected me in the previous movie-based game I covered, Conan from 2007. Oh wait, that was not a movie-based game, I'm stupid, sorry. Okay guys, I get it. Stop, please. Holy fuck, I get it. I think this game deserves a similar treatment to Blood Rain 2, although I don't think that's going to happen because the interest for Aeon Flux Remaster would be pretty low. The gameplay in Aeon Flux is all over the place, in a good way though. The whole game has a steady amount of platforming segments, fighting, shooting and puzzle solving. Let's start with the platforming. The controls in Aeon Flux are solid, but you can feel a bit awkward at first because you move very fast. There are a lot of different animations for climbing, jumping, or even walking on walls. Aeon Flux definitely took some pages from Prince of Persia's book when it comes to this. By the way, I recently covered a lot of Prince of Persia games in a video that nobody watched. Please, for the love of God, go watch that video. I'm gonna cry. The platforming segments in Aeon Flux are quite satisfying, for the most part. Jumping around on platforms definitely has a dose of stiffness to it, but it's usually very precise because the margin for error is very low. It's not nearly as fun as in Prince of Persia games, but it's solid for what it's trying to do. It also has some cool unique ideas, like being able to propel yourself off the edge or turning into a steel ball for these special platforming segments. Using the wires to climb or descend is something you're going to do quite a bit in this game, and it's pretty fun. This game also successfully incorporates combat mechanics into mission objectives. For example, you have this finishing move that allows you to throw enemies far away. Some missions will require you to use this move in order to break something, which is pretty cool. Same goes for other combat mechanics, so let's talk about that. Aeon Flux has some simple fist fighting combos that you can combine in a couple of ways. This is the simplest form of combat in the game, but you're going to use it quite a bit, especially when you run out of ammo. These combos work fine, but just like those platforming segments I mentioned, it feels and they look a bit stiff when it comes to these animations. There are some very cool and satisfying animations in the combat system. The finishing moves I mentioned are great. You can break the neck of enemy and heal yourself at the same time, plant a bomb, throw away the enemy, or recharge your special bar. All of these finishers are more than useful in combat and for the mission objectives. You will use the healing finisher the most for obvious reasons, but I think I like the bomb the most. The AI is smart enough to move out of the way when you do this move, but you can also catch them off guard.
Take cover! Take cover!
It's a very fun ability to use. You can also perform some attacks while doing platforming segments. Then you have ranged weapons that Aeon can use, as long as you have the ammo. The automatic gun is something that you're going to use a lot, since the ammo for it is the easiest to find. Finding ammo for other weapons like the magma rounds, Zinger and Shockwave is not extremely hard, but it's certainly less common. These other weapons pack quite a punch, and they will usually put the enemy on the ground. What I found a bit weird when it comes to this is how the game prevents you from dealing damage to enemies on the ground. I mean, you can still shoot them or use the finishing moves if their health is low. But if you try to punch them, you will take damage for some reason. It's kinda silly. The most disappointing thing when it comes to combat in the game are the boss fights. There are only a handful of boss fights in the game, and they all have some very gimmicky mechanics. It's a shame because the game had more than enough unique combat mechanics which could have been utilized in boss fights. One Helsing game that I covered came out 1 year before this game, and boss fights in that game totally blow Aeon Flux out of the water. As for the puzzles in the game, you have to use hacking abilities in order to open doors, take control of consoles, disable something, and so on. This is done by playing a little minigame with a small ball and getting the ball safely to the next hole. It's way more annoying than it sounds because controlling this goddamn thing is horrible. Some of these puzzles require a very precise movement, and if you even look at the left thumbstick wrong, the ball will hit something which resets the puzzle. It's not a very fun minigame, and it's probably the worst part about the gameplay in general. Although I like the parts when you get to control some big turrets to shoot people, that was pretty fun. And turning into a big steel ball is not the worst idea ever, and those platforming segments were done well. Overall, Aeon Flux is a very unique game that I heavily recommend to everyone.
Well, that goes without saying, doesn't it?
And those will be 5 movie and TV show based games that I played recently.
Ooh, so exciting.
Be sure to subscribe if you enjoyed the video. You can also support me by becoming a YouTube member or a Patreon. I also have some cool t-shirts and hoodies in the theme of the channel, so check that out as well. Huge thanks to all of my current supporters, and I'll see you in the next one.